All right, forestry products are a renewable resource. How so? Why are they renewable?
You can grow back.
You can grow them again, you can grow them back. Okay, so when we have a renewable resource, we can theoretically continue to use that resource as long as we use it at a sustainable rate, which means as long as we use it to a level where it can regrow itself, or as we've talked about, water resources, freshwater resources, resupply itself. And if we don't exceed that level, much like a bank account, we'll always have money in the bank or trees in the forest to utilize. What do we use these particular resources for? Main things we use, timber. By the way, timber is the collective term for just cut trees. We use it for lumber, paper, and fuel. And I'm not actually sure of the order, so that's just a random order that those are put into. As a matter of fact, because they're renewable, there's been a lot of effort put into developing power generation plants that use wood. They pelletize that wood. They make it into little bitty pellets and stuff that'll burn very easily. And you can get a pretty high temp furnace going that of course is enough to boil water and generate electricity. So that's the type of biomass type power plant that is becoming more popular. Whether or not you do sustainable forestry management, of course, is going to be we're going to rely upon how much you take out, but it's also mainly going to rely upon how you remove those trees from there. The worst method, the one that has the most environmental impact and the least likelihood of that forest being able to recover, is through clear cutting. And as the name implies, you just come in and cut down everything, including the trees that you don't want, including the ones that are too small or of a variety of that is not usable for you. But you cut those down too, because access is a big hurdle to overcome when it comes to cutting down trees and things. And even though selective cutting is the best way, it is much more labor intensive and therefore, of course, harder to do. So this is for efficiency. You can go in and cut down everything, no matter what it is what type of tree it is that's in there. Another type of this is still considered clear cutting, but is a little bit better, is strip cutting. So it still has some of the efficiency that you get with clear cutting, because you don't have to pick and choose. You don't have to get your equipment in there, clothes and stuff, and pull things out. You can just go as you go along. In strips, I'll take rows, is of course same idea. And you will typically do that along the contour of the land, which tells you one of the big things that clear cutting, just simply by itself, one of the big problems that it produces, and also one of the reasons why those forests don't recover very well when it happens, is that you get a lot of soil erosion. Of course, once the soil is eroded away, it's very difficult for things to grow, and then you get all the water pollution that's associated with that as well. And so consequently, if you cut in strips, then you have barrier strips of forest that are left along there that can help to catch the runoff and also block the wind from coming in and blowing away the soil and stuff like that. And of course, you also have trees around the strips that can reseed and everything, those that are in those particular areas. And as far as selective cutting goes, there's shelter wood cutting, which means that you mainly take out the mature trees. Those are the ones that are harvested. And this follows along the lines of natural selection. Natural succession. In that, like I said, the things that affect, when we have those clearing events, the things that affect trees the most will affect mature trees even more so. A lot of these are at the end of the lifespan. The wood's getting a little brittle. Of course, if it's so old that it's, the wood is completely eaten up with termites and stuff, that's not going to be of any use. But those trees are not as productive. They're not producing seeds a lot of times anymore, so they don't help the rest of the trees in the ecosystem. And therefore, cutting them out of there is in a way, a service for that ecosystem, as long as it's done practically. And that's shelterwood cutting. Seed tree cutting is another process. You do cut more trees when you do seed tree cutting. It is less selective, and you do harvest more when you do this. So shelterwood cutting in that respect is better than seed tree cutting. But in seed tree cutting, you do relieve the trees that are at a particular seed producing age. Trees, like other organisms, have a certain period in their life when they are more reproductive. You know, there's a young age where they're not producing pollen and seeds and stuff, and then there's an age where they do it maximally, and then there's an age after that where you would cut it in the case of shelterwood cutting. But for obvious reasons, you leave the seed ones in there, and that helps to repopulate the forest. Now, one of the things, the techniques that active forest companies utilize, companies like Georgia Pacific, for example, is a big forestry product company, is they do a rotation schedule. So they will harvest from one section of a forest and then move on to another section of the forest, and then they'll have a rotation as such that by the time they get back around to the original patch of forest they started in, it will have regrown to the point where they can harvest from it again. And that way they can continue to utilize that resource in that forest area again and again and continue to get the forest products out of there as long as the amount they take out is not too great and as long as the cutting techniques that they utilize are, are forest friendly. Okay. All right, so different types of forests. We have old growth forests. These are ones that are at their climax community stage, and they tend to be ones that have hardwood trees in them. Sad thing about this, much of the old growth forest, particularly in temperate regions, where we've seen a lot from civilization. If you remember last week I talked about how grasslands and temperate areas of prairies have been mostly converted over to agriculture. The same is true of a lot of your temperate forests. They're, I think, at like 5% coverage from what they were 300 years ago. That's sad because they're really beautiful ecosystems, but they're in areas where people want to plant crops and things like that. And also the wood that's there is expensive, so that makes it, of course, valuable. So we see a lot in the rainforest, a lot of areas around the world where people are going in and harvesting trees from the rainforest. Some of them are doing it sustainably using selective cutting, but all too many of them are just using clear cutting techniques. But you take, for example, a teak tree that's more than 40 feet tall, which it doesn't take that long for in the rainforest to get that tall. That's worth $5,000 or $6,000 because of the value of the wood and everything. So you can imagine that these companies will go in. They're not in that situation a lot of times. And this is another example of where, when you have a developing country, when you have places that are poor, the business mode is more of maximize your profit on the front end and not worry about what's going to happen 20 or 30 years from now. So they don't have a problem with doing clear cutting harvesting because they're not thinking, oh, well, we want to come back 20 years from now and get some more from here. They're thinking we're going to get whatever we can and get the heck out of there. So the rainforests still do have significant amounts of old growth forest, but that's about the last place you can find large expanses, and they of course are under pressure and threat as we speak. So that's your old growth forest, completely grown out, hasn't really had human impact or harvesting or anything like that. In 200 years is kind of the average time it takes for a hardwood tree to mature. Less than that, probably about 100 years would be more accurate in rainforest. It takes about that long for something from the rainforest to mature. Your second growth forests are ones that have been harvested from in the past 200 years. And they may be on an ongoing, like I said, rotation, where people are going in and obtaining those particular products. They tend to contain mature softwoods. Those are a lot of times harvested. These would be mainly pine. Most of your lumber is pine, and most of your paper products are made from pine. It's a very hardy tree, very widely distributed, and it grows very fast. Your softwood trees, most of your evergreen trees and things like that, in a warmer climate, they grow very fast. So that, of course, is an advantage to people in the tree business and things like that. They're not worth as much because just the old supply and demand kind of thing, but they have a lot more utilization from other ones. You will also, in these forests, of course, have some mature hardwood trees, or young hardwood trees that are still growing up. But remember, it takes about 200 years for them to become mature, so depending upon what stage you're in, He might have some of the younger ones of that type growing up in those areas. And then finally, you do have tree plantations, and those are, as the name implies, farms that are set up specifically to plant and grow trees. A lot of these types of trees are ornamental trees, or they're trees for the different agricultural industries, like fruit trees and nut trees and things like that are going to be sold to farmers and planted, etc. So they need to grow them whole, and a lot of times they'll keep the root ball secured and stuff so they can transplant it. Now, here's the thing about these tree plantations. A lot of people say, well, we should get our forestry products, things like that, from these, so we're not out in the wild taking it from the natural environment. The problem with that logic is that if you're going to make a tree plantation, chances are you're going to make that tree plantation where a forest would normally exist, because you're going to have the rainfall, the sunlight, and all those other kind of things. So if you say, well, I'm trying to save the forest by cutting down 100 acres of forest so I can put up a tree plantation, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So that's why I say properly managed, sustainable forestry techniques, as long as they're not, you don't go over it, as long as they're sustainable, can work out well. Is it as good as a natural undisturbed environment? Of course not. You have environmental impact of people when they go in and cut down the trees. A lot of these are also fertilized, and they use insecticides and stuff in them because, of course, trees need fertilizer and they get diseases as well. So those, of course, are also environmental impacts from it. But if you do harvest from there sustainably, you can continue to do so year after year. Any questions about forestry? Alrighty. There's